Alright, hello and welcome to my second drawing video. I'm Thomas Elderman and I am a fantasy artist. Self-described fantasy artist at least. This drawing took me around 30 hours to complete, and the time lapse is sped up by a factor of 30. It still ended up being around 40 minutes long, so there's a lot of footage to go through and a lot of process to unravel. The basic idea for this was I wanted to take a winged Hussar, which is a historical cavalry unit, which you've probably heard about if you listen to any kind of metal, and basically turn it into a low-ish fantasy or historical fantasy representation with a hippogriff, which is just the horse version of a griffin. The griffin being half eagle and half lion. It's a pretty easy conclusion to jump to, winged Hussar, just give him a winged mount, keep it kind of horse-like. But I think it works really well in the end, and I really like that aesthetic because it's kind of Warhammery as well. So let's just get into it. Please don't be too concerned or too annoyed with the constant panning. It's because I have a tiny drawing tablet and I have to pan all over the place just to get the area I'm working on back into the center of my tablet. Hopefully in the future I'll be able to get a bigger tablet and I won't have to pan as much, but for now it is what it is. If you want to help me in that regard, my commissions are open, and currently you can grab them for $75 to $100, which I think is criminally low, but I don't really get any commissions, so it is what it is. And if slots start filling up, then the price might raise, but for now, they're pretty cheap. So I just went through the sketching phase. I just used the thick wet oils brush, and I was painting pretty quickly, just scribbling around, just scribbling until I came across a bit of a doodle that I couldn't really get away from, and when you do that, then I basically know that you gotta take that and make it into the full piece. If you're doing thumbnailing, you probably need to take it a bit further than that and find maybe 3 or 4 sketches that you really like and can't stop doodling on, and then frame them in nice thumbnails. But since this is more or less a personal piece, I didn't have to deal with that. I just went ahead and started painting once I found something I liked. For the canvas, it's bright orange underneath, and then I'm painting on a thick paint canvas set to 95% opacity. The reason to do that is because oftentimes if you go too black or too white with your colors, it'll deaden your image. And a good way to get around that is to simply make it so you can't ever get to pure white or pure black by having a kind of transparent canvas to work on. And when you go and do a lot of color picking, normally you get deadened colors, but if you do it with this method, your colors will slowly shift towards a saturated orange, which is generally more appealing. I find it helps me make some nicer images. And then at the end of the process, if you want to, you can turn your canvas to 100% opacity, and it'll make your painting look a bit cooler and a lot more contrasty, and the areas that fade into black or fade into white will be more saturated rather than desaturated, and it helps it look a lot better, in my opinion. I've been using a lot of Painter's thick wet oil brush in this painting, and a lot of the loaded oils knife. And then if I'm ever smearing it around, I'm smearing it around with the coarse oils blender. So I decided to do this for a contest that Corel Painter had going on. It's closed now, but I managed to get my submission in right at the very end. It's a pretty free-form contest. There was an illustration category. One of the subtitles was fantasy art, so I thought, oh, I got to get in on that because not too many people use Corel Painter, so I thought I'd probably have a pretty good chance of maybe getting a standing. And I use Corel Painter all the time anyway because I just find it fun to paint in compared to Photoshop. I think I've went over the inspiration, but basically, yeah, winged hussar on a hippogriff, sorry, a hippogriff. Of course, inspired by history, but also by the band Sabaton, which I listen to quite frequently when I'm drawing. I find their songs are very hype, and I love them. Even though like it's completely historical. I'm a fantasy artist, but it doesn't matter. It's still good. If I'm gonna listen to metal while I'm drawing, it's gonna be Sabaton. Otherwise, it's like video game OSTs. So, as I go through this, I'm gonna start eventually painting a lot of gold and stuff onto the hippogriff, pelts of tigers and other status symbols, because in real life the winged hussars were an elite cavalry unit and they liked to flaunt their eliteness by having like rugs, like Persian rugs on their saddles. I don't know if they're actually Persian, but they were ornate. They had tiger skins, leopard skins, a bunch of gold, just very expensive dyes, just the whole works. And it really it lent to their iconicism, I suppose. They're an iconic cavalry regiment from history, so all those things definitely helped. So, like I said, this is historical fantasy, so it's based in real life, but I just push some things. Normally, I just do very like standalone kind of drawings where you can just kind of anticipate or read that whatever I'm drawing occurs in its own world and not our world. But in this one, you could kind of guess that this is like somewhat historical. You could suspend your disbelief and maybe retell something like the lifting of the Siege of Vienna or something, but with this stuff. And it'd be pretty cool, I think. Hippogriffs themselves, I don't know which European mythology they come from, but I know they come from at least one, similar to griffins as well. They're featured fairly extensively in Warhammer Fantasy, which I'm drawing a lot of inspiration from for the visual style of this piece. Popular amongst the Bretonnian factions in that intellectual property, even though this is in no way related to Warhammer. I just find the designs of these flying monsters to be very nice, and personally, I like them more than griffins, so that's why I'm doing it. So, hippogriffs are part eagle, so I chose to go for golden eagle because I really like the way that color dances off of their feathers. Light penetrates the feathers and bounces around on the inside through subsurface scattering, and when it comes out, it leaves a bit of a golden or orange hue, so I really like that look. That's why I went for it as opposed to like a bald eagle or some other kind of bird of prey. There's a lot of difficult rendering problems with feathers, though, because they're very small, they overlap each other, they cast shadows on themselves, they let light through and back out, like I said. But in the end, it works out fairly well, I think, especially using the thick paint to my advantage. If I keep things more painterly, it lets me get away with a lot of I don't want to say laziness, we'll just call it efficiency, but you can imply a lot of the texture that you need without having to actually go in and manually render out everything, which is really good because this piece already took like 30 hours, and if I was making it pixel perfect, I would still be working on it, and that contest would be long done. So, well, that's why I do it that way. The wings are pretty cool. The bigger the better, because the bigger they are, the cooler they are. And if you want to adhere to the rule of cool, which is basically so long as you make things look cool, you can reasonably expect people to suspend their disbelief and just enjoy the art or the story or whichever. The wings are super big because this beast has to be able to lift itself off the ground and armor and a armored rider as well. So uh, one of the comments I got while I was working on this was that it was way too big, but I think Hippogriff has to be super big in order to just carry that whole burden and still be fairly usable in combat. Because when you're doing paintings like this, you have to do just a little bit of thought behind what they would be used for in order to keep things kind of believable, because you can't really expect people to suspend their disbelief for nothing. You have to do in a bit of legwork yourself to make things at least a little bit believable, and then they can do the rest as far as that's concerned. Eagle wings are kind of difficult to describe. You definitely need to look up reference to draw them nicely, because the leading edge of their wings has a bit of an aerofoil on it, like airplane wings do, with feathers instead of metal, obviously, and it bends, so they have a bunch of little feathers that lead and are stuck close to the wing, and just like the rest of their feathers, they interact with light interestingly. So when I finally get around to fully illustrating the wings in this piece, you'll be able to see that there's like pretty dramatic lines of sunlight reflecting off of these aerofoils. I had some issues figuring out the anatomy for the rest of it, because like the eagle's only half, the other half is horse, and you've got the chest of a horse, but there also needs to be some supporting muscles to work the wings. So I had to like make up some things by overlaying pretend muscles on top of real muscles that sit just below the skin, which is why it looks like it has two sets of pecs. And also, its forelegs are based on the horse, but it still terminates in like a hand eagle talony type thing. So it starts high up in its chest, and its elbow only just like protrudes out of its main body mass. So it's a bit of a struggle to get that to work right, but in the end, I think it looks fairly decent. As for the back half, though, I'm not particularly happy with it. I think if I was to do this again, I'd have to spend a lot more time researching and figuring out the anatomy of the back end of the horse's legs, because it's quite difficult in my experience to find good reference for horses' rear legs, especially where their hooves connect to the ground, because a lot of pictures of horses are taken either of their upper half, because that's what everyone's interested in, or it's the full horse, but they're in a pasture, so grass is obscuring their hooves. So there's a bit of guesswork that had to go in, and I think I did a fairly decent job, but there's also a lot of weird muscles that go on in horses' legs, so hopefully I get better at doing that in the future. Furthermore, when I get to the end, you'll see that the horse's legs are a bit too bright. If I was to go back and do this again, I'd definitely make the legs darker and just have the contrast be lessened overall towards the bottom half of the picture, just so that we can really focus on the top. Eventually, I might have already done it already. I didn't quite see, but originally the rider was sat on this thing like you would expect someone to be sat on a regular horse with his legs to either side, but I figured it's probably too big to do that comfortably, and also you'd run the risk of screwing around with your mount's wings if you did that, because your legs would be like underneath its wings and probably ruffling its feathers or something. So I decided to get rid of his leg and imply instead that he's kneeling on the saddle, like it's a saddle that you kneel on, because then it wouldn't screw with the wings of your mount. And I would guess that if you were trying to fight a war on the back of something that was flying like this, you'd really want to try to not make it fall out of the sky or like buck you off or something like that. So eventually I'll erase his foot and just kind of leave it like that. I've given him a arquebus, which is like the precursor to a musket. In the latter bits of the winged hussars era, they did have some firearms, although usually they were pistols. Before the winged hussars finally stopped being tenable in combat as cavalry got phased out. Arquebus is like even less accurate version of a musket. It might fire shot instead of individual musket balls, but eventually I'll get around to rendering it out. His other weapon is a lance with a banner on it, and that's pretty typical of winged hussars. I've got some pretend Polish insignia and color schemes going on to, imply that this is Poland, although I didn't specifically put any like real historical insignia on stuff other than the colors, of course, because this is very close to Poland, but it's not really real life, so I want to make sure it's not actually like legit Poland from our timeline. I've given this thing lamellar in some places because I think that makes the most sense. Lamellar is a armoring method whereby little plates of metal are woven together, so it's kind of a lightweight alternative to chainmail, and still gives pretty good protection. And I'm inspired to do that by basically the Mountain Blade games. Because I'm not sure that winged hussars actually used lamellar armor in their cavalry, but it does look cool. And like I said, so long as it looks cool, you can get away with a bunch of things. At least I think, and I hope, because if I can't, then I'm basically boned. I decided to repaint his beak to look like an Easter egg because I thought it'd be kind of cool or kind of funny if you owned a mount like this, you'd probably paint its beak if you're into painting Easter eggs, you know? So if you're from a culture that paints Easter eggs like many Slavic people do, you could totally paint whatever you want on its beak. Which you couldn't do on a horse because it's too many fleshy bits. I thought it looked cool. I still think it looks cool. The helmet is not inspired by anything in particular. I just designed it to look like it fits over an eagle's head. I gave it two pieces though, because while this thing is like looking upright and its head is at a right angle to its neck, real eagles fly with their head straight out from their neck, so I want to be able to imply that this thing can like dive and look straight ahead, and its armor needs to be able to adjust to support that. Otherwise it'll just be stuck like this, and it would catch a lot of air drag, and that would not be good, especially for a lancer. Whenever I'm pausing for fairly long bits at a time, it's because I'm on my second monitor just Googling reference for whatever I'm working on at the moment. lamellar was hard to figure out to render because there's all the little individual plates that look in very specific directions, and they're all flat, so you just kind of have to pick a color for them to reflect. So you got to put on that Fresnel rim lighting, which I always do. Perhaps I overdo usually, but I think it looks too good to pass up in most scenarios. Besides this, if it looks a bit messy up close, I do like paint at like stupid resolutions, so I intend for it to be viewed further away, so to speak, even though that doesn't really exist on digital displays. Like when you actually see it online, you'll only see it fairly small, even though the actual source file is 10 by 20 inches, which I do for the two reasons. Like when you draw something and it looks good, usually it'll look better from a little further away, so you can use that to your advantage by drawing something really big and then just downscaling it and saying that's your final version. It lets you put a lot of detail in, basically, with a few brush strokes, because you'll know it'll get crunched down, and a lot of the detail will just be suggested by people's minds when they look at your stuff, so you don't actually have to go through and put in everything, which is of course a bonus. Here we go again. The lamellar rendering was seemingly endless. There's so many little plates, and they all have edges, and they all are reflecting something, and they're all interwoven, so I have to like kind of figure out how they would overlap with each other, and they're all kind of curved as well. So it's not exactly a nightmare, but it was definitely more of a chore than it was a joy to paint, which is fine. Painting can't be like fun in games all the time. One of the things that let me render the feathers really nicely and easily was the thick or the loaded oils knife, because it leaves like thick streaks all along a flat edge, so I could pretty easily just like suggest the little front. I don't know how to explain it, but feathers, they have the quill, and then they have the actual like feather bit that sticks out from it. As you can basically just hit it all up in just a couple of brush strokes by just doing it in the right direction, and you just combine that with lower opacity, and it ends up looking pretty good for rather minimal effort, considering how hard it is to paint feathers. You'll notice I put some white feathers in areas. Golden eagles will have white plumage if they're young, so you can kind of use that to imply that this hippogriff is a younger one. As it would get older, it would have more even golden feathers everywhere. It's not important for like the visual story I'm telling, but it's a thing to keep in mind. All right, I'm putting in a big golden plate. It's like a reliquary. It's gonna have a skull in the middle, with a bunch of like ornate carvings and stuff. Again, very Warhammer inspired. Warhammer loves skulls, and I love skulls, so I'm gonna stick it in, put a candle on its head, and just pretend that it was somebody important at some point in the past. Maybe like a religious scholar or something like that, or like the former knight who used to ride this steed. Somebody important. I love rendering metal, so I'll just take like my sweet time just rendering this thing out, putting a whole bunch of little feathers and stuff all around. Once again, this isn't Warhammer, but I'm definitely inspired by it. And I never even played the tabletop. I only got into the whole world because of Total War, Warhammer, and Vermintide. I'm just zooming in and out and in and out and flipping my canvas around to see if I can spot any inconsistencies with like perspective and proportions and stuff, or whether or not, like, if you zoom in and work on something like I'm doing here, you run the risk of becoming completely blind to the rest of the canvas, which is like the context that this little piece sits in. So you need to make sure it still fits, otherwise you're just wasting your time rendering, because you'll have to fix it again afterwards. Eventually, I'll finally be able to stream my drawings in real time, but I can't do it at the moment because I live in rural Canada and our internet is basically third world out here. But I managed to opt into the Starlink beta, so hopefully when that comes, I'll actually have decent internet for the first time in my life and I'll be able to stream. I have tried streaming in the past, but the stream will just cut out like every 30 seconds or so, and what few viewers did join the stream would just drop off because it would freeze for like a minute at a time. And that's, of course, very discouraging. Now, at least I finally got around to making some YouTube videos in the meantime, so it's not all bad. I just hope Starlink lives up to the hype. Rendering armor is both fun and a nightmare, because I find armor sits on people's bodies pretty weirdly, because it's like a big inflexible hunk of metal, so it has to accommodate a variety of configurations for the like spine and rib cage moving in relation to the pelvis, so it tends to be quite bulky. And if it's not bulky, it's made up of tons of little like interlocking plates. So unless you've got a lot of reference and a pretty good understanding of how armor should look, it's just never going to really look right. So I think I did a fairly decent job this time around. We got like his little iconic helmet. We've got some more red and white, because like you can't go wrong with just having more red and more white. I was trying to, like, yeah, this guy is definitely whatever Poland is in this world. That's where he's from. Probably likes pickles. Probably likes sausage. And of course, you gotta put in the golden trim, because if you don't, like, you're just a peasant. I'm about to put in his iconic wings on the back. I over-designed them a little bit, I think. Like, just because, oh, it's fantasy, so it's got to be a little bit more fancy than real life. So, you know, it's a guilty pleasure of mine. Just to overdo the design. Fortunately, for once in my life, I got the guy's face right on basically the first try, so I didn't really edit it too much after that. Which is nice. Usually I have to like re-render faces around 3 times before they look right. Yeah, he looks a little bit smug, but don't tell me you wouldn't be smug if you were in the situation. Oh gosh, it's a good thing I get rid of his foot, because right now his leg looks bent forward. He has a broken leg. When I showed this finished piece to people, some people mistook the guy on the back for Carl Franz. Um, this isn't Warhammer, so it's not Carl Franz. It's just a Hussar. That's all. If you want to follow me on social media or look at my other works from the past, you can follow me on my Artstation, my Instagram, or my Twitter. I have pretty few followers on each of those, so your follow would be greatly appreciated. I'll leave a link to each of those in the description. Somewhat recently, I did actually manage to sell some prints of mine to somebody on the internet, which I thought was both really cool and really exciting. I was super glad for somebody to value my artwork enough that they wanted some signed prints. If you would like some signed prints, I have a pricing scheme and guide on my website, and I've also got a log of how many prints are in circulation at the moment, so you can get an idea of scarcity, the available sizing for my past works, and yeah, it's fairly simple. I think my pricing scheme is pretty fair as well. It's just the cost I have to pay to have it printed times two, and that times two represents basically my entire profit. So if you want something fairly cheap, you could just be like, I want a signed print on like photo paper, and I'll just go print it off on photo paper, and whatever it cost me to print it. So like maybe $30 for like a big one, I'll charge you 60, and then plus shipping, and then that's all. But if you want like a really big canvas print, then it's gonna cost more money. But then you get canvas, and you know, the more expensive it is, the less there are. I would really love to do a commission for somebody, though. It's been ages since I've done one. Especially if it's D&D related. I'll treat your character nice, I swear. Give him huge muscles. Oh, here I go. Look, 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 look. Look, I'm doing it. I am rendering out the wing, putting in the aerofoils. Makes it look a lot more realistic. So basically, wings have like 3 rows of feathers. There's like, or maybe 4. There's the stuff that leads the wing, like at the very front, and then there's like a set of feathers that are immediately behind them, and then another mat of feathers behind that, and then there's the final really long feathers, which can like flex to let air through, so when the wings come up, they don't catch as much air resistance as when they go down, which is how birds stay in the air. I'd have to guess this thing has hollow bones, because I don't know. I don't know how it would stay in the air otherwise. I eventually give this thing a breastplate because I realized, you know, if you were charging at something and yeah, you armored its head, but its chest was completely un like unarmored, it'd probably have a bad time. So I give it a breastplate in a bit. So don't worry. Well, Hippogriff is safe for now. Sometimes you see the painting flash black and white. That's just because I have another layer on top of my painting layer, which is just set to color, so it just makes everything black and white. It's not actually the best solution because really, really saturated colors will show up as white, even though they value-wise are darker than that. But it's kind of quick and dirty and gets the job done. I wish there was a way to hotkey like grayscale color mode in Painter, but there's not. So it is what it is. I just have to kind of deal with it and use my common sense to figure out values. It's really hard to get reference for that area of a horse without going blind from seeing things no man was meant to see. But that's fine, you just leave it in shadow and call it a day. I thought about putting like a vestigial fourth digit, because 3 digits is kind of cartoony, but I didn't like the way it looked, so I just got rid of it, and it looked better this way, even though it's not particularly realistic that it would only have 3 digits and like a thumb. But in my previous video, I did an illustration of a raptor, and they actually do have like 3 fingers, which is kind of weird. I don't know how that happened. Rendering out like eagles or birds' skin as it is, like it's kind of like scaly skin. I think it's really interesting, the texture they have. It lets you do a lot of bounce lights and rim lights because it's quite hard. It's almost like rendering plastic or rubber. Fun times. So yeah, like I said, basically the entirety of this illustration was done with just 3 brushes. And they're all default in Painter. So if you buy Painter, by the way, I'm not sponsored. If you buy Painter, you have access to all those brushes right out of the box. I don't really think it's necessary at all to buy the extra brushes, if I'm being honest. I left the sky pretty blank because I didn't want to have any extra details getting in the way of the main subject matter. And probably could have used a couple clouds though, but I never put them in. It's fine though, because completely blue skies are realistic, but still. Maybe it would have been nice for a couple streaks here and there. So rather mercifully, we're coming up somewhat close to the end of the video. We still have around 10 minutes left, if I'm reading this right. I think one of the last things I do is fully render out its legs. This thing took me a long time. And basically, since the deadline for the contest was looming over me, my strategy was basically to render from the top down. So if I ran out of time at a last-ditch effort, I could just crop the bottom off, which I hadn't completely rendered yet, and just fix up the stuff I had and submit that. So that's why all the detail is like stacked at the top. Normally, like under normal circumstances, you would never do that, but since I was going for a contest, I thought it was probably a good idea just to hedge my bets. Alright, here comes the breastplate. I don't make it lamellar. Of course, I put more like feather and wing design motifs in there because they're really cool and they make a lot of sense given the context of this painting. It also lets me paint in more reflections. Reflections are pretty nice as well. If you can render them out believably, I think it's a huge asset. People love reflections. Or maybe I just like shiny things. I'm a raccoon in a man's body. You don't even have to like break your back rendering out all the details. You just imply that it's there. It's like polished to a near mirror finish, but it's still kind of hazy, so good to go. I'm putting in even more panther leopard pelts hanging off of this thing because, you know, the more the merrier. I said this in the last video, but once again, I definitely recommend recording your drawing process and re-watching it after the fact. It seriously helps you catch a lot of details that you might have missed before you bring it to finish. Now, the thick, oily brush is great for brushing in smoother stuff, like the sky, because it kind of blends into the color that it's painting over as well. 10 out of 10 brush, would recommend. Basically, a great replacement for just a default hard round brush. It's like a hard round blush. A hard round brush plus. I better get around to fixing the feathers underneath its forelegs. Because if it turns out after rewatching this and dubbing over it that I never did that, I'm gonna be pretty mad, and I'm gonna have to go and fix that. It's gonna be a little bit embarrassing if I don't get around to it. I hope you're enjoying the process thus far, because I know I really enjoyed painting this. Okay, I'm coming into the final stretch of rendering here. Please tell me I addressed those feathers underneath its forearms, because I'm actually starting to sweat. It's been a couple of days since I finished this, and now I'm doing the recording, and I legit cannot remember if I ever got around to doing that. Because if I didn't, then I submitted an unfinished piece to the contest, and that would actually make me pretty sad. But also sounds like something I would do. If that did happen, then I'm just going to have to make it a rule that before I do anything with something I think is finished, I just look at the time lapse and watch it through completely just to make sure that everything is actually done. Because like I said, you can see your mistakes happening in real time. All right, do not tell me. Oh, I forgot to address them. Okay, be right back after I record fixing that. All right, I'm back. It's a pretty big rip on my part, but I did forget to fully render out those feathers, so I went back in and I rendered them out a little bit. There's a difference between just having large brush strokes to, to imply texture, and just having a cursory brush stroke there that you forgot to actually render out. So that's what I did. Fortunately, I didn't post this anywhere, but I did submit it to the contest, so that is a big rip. But at least it's not in my portfolio yet. I fixed it up, and we're good to go now. So thanks for watching. Prints available. Commissions are open. And peace.